Hello, and welcome to Charted, an astrology podcast. My name's James, and today we are going to talk about the 8th house in astrology. So the 8th house is one of the more challenging houses. A lot of astrologers kind of debate what's the most difficult. I think generally speaking, pretty much everyone agrees that 8th, 12th, and 6th are the three most difficult. What order you put them in, it's kind of different people's opinions. Personally, I would put the 6th and the 12th as kind of the two hardest, with the 8th kind of coming in a little bit further back. And that's because the 8th house has certain qualities to it that are a little more advantageous compared to the 6th and the 12th. And we'll discuss that today. So let's dive into this. Let's dive into the 8th house and why it's such a challenging house and what it represents. So first and foremost, what's the astronomy, right, or perspective in terms of where the house is at, what qualities it has? Number one, it's on the western side of the chart because where is it? It is in the sky above the western horizon. What does that mean? Well, there's two things right out of the gates. Number one, obviously, it's on the western side of the chart, and technically it's going to be part of the 7th house triad, so it's going to be dealing with other people or have a strong element of other people to it. Additionally, it is the succeedant house within the 7th house triad, right? It's succeeding the 7th house. It's coming after the 7th house. The succeedant houses have a potential to them, right? They haven't yet kind of reached the height of their power, and so there's a kind of an innate thing you can kind of build into them over the course of your life or over the course of whatever a chart is representing. So there's potential there in the 8th house, and it's dealing with other people, and it's also on the top half of the chart. We haven't really talked about this yet because everything we've looked at so far has either been the horizons, right, the 1st and the 7th house, or the houses below the horizon. So now we finally are reaching the houses above the horizon. So what does that mean? Well, if we remember back, what's the kind of the deepest point in the chart? The 4th house. And if you remember from that episode, the 4th house, we said, represents privacy, right? What is private? It's the most secretive thing. You can't see it. So then the opposite to that would simply be what is public. And we'll see this when we get to the 10th house, right? Kind of the peak of our publicity in the world. So the 10th house, or not the 10th, the top half of the chart is going to be the houses that deal with things that are more public in nature, right? They're more out in the broader world, so to speak. They're dealing less with kind of our personal lives and more with our, right, lives in relation to what's going on in the broader scope of things. Now, additionally, with the houses that are in the above the horizon, if I could talk correctly, there's a visible quality to them, right? Because we can finally see them. With the houses below the earth, we can't see what's actually going on, right? From figuring out the planets and things like that, we're just calculating the points mathematically. But in terms of the houses above the horizon, we can now visibly see what is happening, right? And that's going to give us a clue as to what's actually those houses are about, to an extent. So let's keep following through this. What else can we say about the 8th house? There's no planets in their joy in the 8th, so we don't have to worry about that. And then the last thing is it is in aversion to the 1st, right? Aversion being, it's kind of like it's not seen. It's a blind spot. It has nothing in common. You see this best through the whole sign perspective, which is part of why I use whole sign system. But if you look at it from a whole sign system, the 1st and the 8th house have nothing in common, right? They will not have any elements in common, no modalities in common, and no gender in common. And so there's a kind of discomfort there, right? If the 1st house represents you, the 8th house is then going to represent an area of life that is naturally uncomfortable to be because it is so different from you. It's disresonant. Additionally, this aversion is a 150-degree aspect, which we call a quincunx, or an inconjunction, right? We talked about this with the 6th house. It's kind of a, maybe broad strokes terms, it's kind of a cross between a trine and a opposition, which means sometimes it kind of works out and flows naturally, and sometimes it's very disharmonious, right? It's a blockage. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's always going to be this uncomfortable area where you just, it's kind of icky, it's frustrating, right? Because it's not ever going to seem to work properly. Additionally, aversion, in how the ancients kind of looked at, was seen as kind of a, genuinely seen as a blind spot, right? It was seen as you cannot see this house. And when we look at the sky in the 8th house, right, visibly, physically, what do we see? Well, the 8th and the 12th are both going to have this quality of kind of secrecy a little bit, or hiding, right? Why? Well, if you look at the sky in the 8th house, right, which is about 30 degrees above the western horizon, that's about where the 8th house would be. What you will notice is that at the end of the day, as the sun moves into the 8th house, what happens? The sky begins to change from the bright, vibrant, white, yellow light that we have during the day to a more hazy, orangish light that slowly dims as it moves through the 8th house and then towards the 7th. Additionally, you have heat begins to dissipate, right? Because you're moving from day to night slowly. You're not there yet. It's not nighttime, but it's the end of the day, so it's now cooling off. Additionally, and finally, I should say, when the sun is in the 8th, it is at a position in the sky that is now close to eye level. So when you look to the west, when the sun is there, right, you're looking almost directly at the sun. And the sun's very bright, which means it is blinding. It obscures what's going on over there. And so with the 8th house, then, you get this kind of blinding effect, right? Or obscuring effect, that might be a better way to put it, an opaqueness, where you can't really see what's going on over there because the sun is too bright. It's clouding out. It's right in your field of vision. And so that's the nature of the 8th house. It's a very hard place to see. And so there's an element of secrecy that's going to go on in the 8th house. So what do we get then when we put all this together? I want to talk real fast about nighttime, and then we'll dive into the signification. When we think of night, because essentially what the 8th house is, when we're looking at it in the skies, it's where the day is dying, right? It's fading away. It's transitioning to nighttime. But it's not yet there, right? It's that almost, but not quite. It's that succeedant quality, right? And the thing is what is nighttime, right? From an ancient person perspective, most of human history, actually. It's a time where nothing happens, right? Because they didn't have electricity. And so when it became dark, there wasn't really an easy way to go out and do things anymore. Humans also do not have very good nocturnal vision. So again, double challenge there. We don't have light, and we are not good at seeing in the dark. Additionally, if you go out into the wild, right, predators come out at night, or a lot of them do. Not always, but a lot of predators hunt at night, which puts humans at a disadvantage. We're biologically not very superior to many species, but our mind and our ability to make tools is kind of what sets us apart, right? That's the advantage, but that requires we be able to see what we're doing so that we can function properly. So in ancient times then, going out at night was putting yourself in danger, putting yourself at risk because you couldn't see and because things kind of lurked out in the darkness. Additionally, something else we notice is that throughout the entirety of human society, individuals who wanted to do nefarious deeds, let's put it that way, usually did so under the cover of darkness. They did it at nighttime or behind closed doors. Why? Well, because if they're doing something that is wrong or doing something that would be seen as bad, dangerous, unacceptable by social customs, religious customs, what have you, right? Where they would be ostracized from society because it's disruptive to society. So they had to do those things at night or in places where it was dark, where it was hidden. So again, that nighttime kind of goes along with danger, right? Dark things happen in the night. Dangerous things happen in the night. And so what do we do as humans? We go to sleep, right? We go in the safety of our homes, hopefully, and we go to bed and we rest. And we recharge for the next day. So going back to the 8th house then, right? It's this period in the sky where it is preparing for the danger. It is preparing for the nighttime where danger lurks. And that's going to be a huge part of kind of what this house is about and the whole fading away and everything else. So what is the 8th house about? Kind of as a summation, it's going to be two things. Number one, it's going to be about danger, right? I kind of just said it momentarily ago. The second thing is it's going to be about shared resources. How does that make sense? Well, last week we talked about the opposition, or last episode, right? With the 7th being in opposition to the 1st, and how every house going forward would have an oppositional quality to, right, one we have already looked at. Well, the 8th is opposite to the 2nd. What is the 2nd house about? It's about personal resources, which means the 8th house then is going to be about other people's resources, the resources that are opposite to me. So the 8th house is going to embody this quality of danger, and it's going to embody this quality of shared resources or others' resources, right? So let's tackle each of these individually. Looking first at resources, and this is the area where there's a lot of benefit to the 8th house. And people with good 8th houses tend to really do well from this, at least from my observation. So what is other people's resources, right? Well, on a very basic level, that's going to be the money of other people. So that's going to be things, and it's going to be specifically, because when you look at a chart, or specifically your chart, you're looking at how the chart describes you. So anything dealing with other people is going to be how you interact with them or with their qualities. So if the 2nd house is other people's resources, it's going to show your interaction with that. So that's going to be things like, right, money you get from a client, or money you pay to somebody you've contracted, right? So it's going to be that money kind of dealing with other people. It's going to show debts, loans, taxes, right? All of those kinds of things, because they are money that's owed to somebody else or received from somebody else. That means it's also going to show inheritance. And this will tie into the danger and the fading aspect in a little bit, and we'll circle back to that. But inheritance is something you'd see in the 8th house as well. When you happen upon lucky things from others, right? That's also going to be an 8th house quality. What are other things we share, though, besides money and wealth and physical objects, right? It's going to be emotions. It's going to be thoughts. It's going to be connections. So the 8th house is going to represent, on a very specific level, intimacy. Why? Because what is intimacy? It is sharing kind of at the most deepest level. Right? When you are intimate with something, you have an extremely in-depth knowledge of the thing. Or if it's a person, of them and they of you. There's an exchange. But it's on a very deep level. Right? So the 8th house is going to show how we handle those exchanges, right? Those shared feelings, those shared connections we have with other people on a very intimate level. So the 8th house deals with intimacy. On the episode I did on the 5th house, I talked about how that represents romance, and as a result, kind of sex is just a kind of romantic thing. There's some people who would equate the 8th house to sex. I've never really understood it other than to say sex is a very intimate activity. So the 8th house being intimacy certainly could represent it in that way, but more so from the intimacy kind of paradigm. Not really the, hey, let's have a quickie, after work kind of a thing. That's more 5th house. So the 8th house then is going to be everything and anything that we share with others and our relationship to the resources other people have. That means it's also going to show the resources of our spouse or partners, right? And so transits to that area of life could show things going on with them and their money and their resources, right? It's also going to be things that they have resources for themselves, such as character, values, right? Why? Because those are resources we have that are on a very personal, internal level. So it's going to show the values of other people and the character of other people and how we kind of interact with those things. Do we ignore it? Or do we accept the boundaries and we work alongside it? Are we harmonious? Can we accept other people's values, etc.? So that's the kind of oppositional side. And like I said, that's where there's a lot of success, if you will, potential, right? Because as you age, as you go through life, the ability to acquire things from other people is a very 8th house thing. If you look at Aries rising, for example, Aries is about acquiring resources, right? It wants to get what it needs, and it does so in a very direct manner. It says, I have a feeling, I have a desire, right? I'm hungry, so I'm going to reach out and I'm going to grab this piece of pizza, and I'm going to eat it. And it doesn't think about it, and it doesn't do anything else. And if you look at the chart for an Aries, it has Scorpio in the 8th house. Scorpio is also ruled by Mars. So in the case of a Aries rising, the resources of others is naturally part of what it's trying to get at all times. It's always trying to get resources from other people because it's trying to get what it needs. And a lot of times you do that through others. So then what's the difficulty of this house, right? Obviously, from the resource side, it could be things like taxes, debts, right? Those are resources kind of outflow to other people that can be detrimental to you on a material standpoint. But what's the danger side of things, right? Let's discuss this. So when I say it's the house of danger, mental crisis may be another term you could throw out there, but danger, when our bodies are in danger, what happens? Right? Biologically, you have what's called the fight or flight response. Right? Your body senses something that's harmful, potentially. Right? Because that's what danger is. Danger is your body's ability to sense, hey, something's wrong. Something is not normal. Something is here that shouldn't be, that could hurt me, that could harm me, that could disrupt my well-being, potentially disrupt my health, my ability to live. And survival is one of the kind of core things biologically that our bodies are wired to be about. So the ability to sense danger, to understand that danger exists, is a very necessary quality for us as humans. Because if we didn't sense danger, we probably would have gone extinct a long time ago. Right? I don't know if this is true. This is just what I remember from elementary school, but the dodo bird, right, if you've ever heard of it, was around and was a very dumb bird and would just walk up to things that would attack it and kill it, like humans. And so we hunted them, and we maybe ate them, I'm not really sure, and they went extinct because they didn't have that sense of danger that, hey, these humans are going to, right, harm me. And so for us, then it's important that we have that sense. And so the eighth house is going to show a lot of things regarding how we handle that danger kind of instinct. So let's unpack this. Number one, it's going to show fight or flight response, right? Very basic. When things are dangerous, what do? We either fight it, right, or we flee. Or I suppose the third thing is you freeze. That's also a response. And each of the signs has different approaches to kind of what they do to manage danger, right? And certain signs are a little more equipped to handle it than others. And what does this mean? This is all mostly going to be on a mental perspective. Because the sixth house, as we discussed 2 episodes ago, deals with how we handle crisis and afflictions and obstacles in a very physical sense. Right? It's how we work through them. But the eighth house is going to be how we handle that on kind of the psychological level, right? That psychological, oh, hey, this is dangerous. I got to work through it, right? I got to fix it. And that's where that sixth house kind of kicks in as an after effect. So they mirror each other, and they help each other, right? They're in sextile to each other. But they're not inherently the same. So the eighth house shows how we kind of have that fight or flight response and what we do about it. It's also going to show then what we tend to hide in our life. Let me explain this a little bit more in depth. When I say what we hide, it's because there's a word that's often associated with the eighth house, which is going to be taboo, right? Things that are taboo. What is taboo? If you look it up in the dictionary, definition for a taboo is, right, what society says is unsafe, essentially, or harmful. I.e., it's things that are dangerous, that collectively, right, other people have said are dangerous. So not just physical danger that we can be in, but now we can go to things like emotional danger, mental danger, spiritual danger. Right? These are all different forms of danger that our bodies, our minds, our emotions can conceptualize. We interact with people on a bigger scale. So that means in the eighth house, you're going to see when people have things going on for themselves that they find to be dangerous and have a response from. Let's give an example. Or maybe let me back up before we give the example. The response oftentimes as a child is to hide the things that are seen as, hey, I have this quality and it's, right, noted as dangerous, as taboo. Therefore, I must hide it. Right? I have to repress it. I have to push it down. I can't let it exist because otherwise, right, I'm in danger if I embody that quality. That's usually what happens with the eighth house. It's the house of repression, of secrets. Because, as I said, when things are taboo, they're seen as dangerous by society. What do? What do the nefarious people do? They hide things. They do it in the dark. They do it behind closed doors when no one can see them. And it's that same kind of thing for us as well. Right? Psychologically, when we have things that we deem unsafe from others, whether it's some way we act, right? Whether it's some belief system, some religious belief, some cultural pattern, right? What do? We don't show it. We hide it. So the eighth house is going to show what we tend to repress psychologically. And this can be very basic, right? For example, take a Scorpio rising. Scorpio rising has Gemini in the eighth house. Gemini is about sharing things and exchanging things and trading things and talking and communicating. But Scorpios are very intimate. And when you are very intimate, right, you can't just be being very intimate with everybody because that's going to leave you very vulnerable and get you wounded. That's an unsafe way to be. So then what's the response? The response for Scorpio is to repress, to hide that Gemini impulse, to be communicative, to be, right, ultra social and talkative and exchanging all the time. So it represses it, it hides it, and it only comes out when it needs to act on those eighth house things. That is, things like intimacy, right? Makes sense. Gemini is very much about exchange, and Scorpios, when they get into an intimate place, what do? They're very intimate. They exchange. That's when they embody that Gemini quality. But publicly, they tend to hide it, which means Scorpios tend to not be very forthcoming about what they think or what they believe or what's going on inside them. And so that's the nature of the eighth house, is it shows what we tend to hide, right? First, you can look at it by sign. Whatever sign is in your eighth house is going to be the sign that you tend to repress naturally, just because it doesn't coexist very easily with who you are naturally. For a Scorpio, if they want to be intimate, right, it would only follow that they would not be openly sharing with everybody, because that leaves them vulnerable. On the flip side, it's also going to show things we hide in kind of a more negative way, right? For example, if you grow up in a house where it's seen to, let's use, say, the moon. If you grow up in a household where emotions are not seen as safe, expressing your emotions is not seen as safe because they're turned against you, right? Because you're bullied for it, or what have you. What do? You learn not to share the emotions. You learn not to express the emotions. You learn to repress those things, those connections. Why? Because connection is unsafe. That was the unsafe example put forth by your parents or your family growing up, whatever the situation was. So when you have the moon in the eighth house, you get somebody who tends to really hide their kind of nurturing, loving attachment qualities. And so you get this vibe for that person where embodying emotion, embodying attachment is naturally unsafe. And it's something you'd have to work through. The eighth house is certainly, if you've got placements there, 9 times out of 10, it's things you need to work through at some point in your life, because you grow up in an environment where a planet, a quality, wasn't seen as safe to be. And so you naturally hide it. You naturally repress it to get out of danger. And so as an adult, then we have to learn, hey, okay, what qualities do I have here that are hindering me, that are holding me back, psychological hang-ups? And the beauty of the eighth house is that you can work through these things. They're not permanent hang-ups. If you have eighth house stuff, it's not something you're doomed with. You should never look at it that way. It doesn't make it easy, for sure, but it's not a curse. It's not a death sentence. Now, what else can we say about this idea of danger? Well, it represents things that are going to be seen as danger, or as I said, things that are taboo, which means the eighth house represents topics that are taboo and how we handle those topics and how we interact with those topics. Which means certain signs are going to be more prone to, right, being into kind of oddball stuff, if you will, more so than others. Namely, right, going back to Scorpio. Scorpio's got Gemini there. Gemini is curious. It's always wanting to learn about everything. So for Scorpio rising, right, having Gemini in the eighth house means that it's always looking to learn about what? Things that are taboo. Things that are, right, kind of hidden, secretive. Why? It's interesting to Scorpio. And as luck would have it then, that makes Scorpios pretty good detectives. So the eighth house is what we hide. It's what we repress. That also means then it's going to represent secrets generally. And it's going to be what other people are hiding and repressing. And it's going to represent our interactions with those secrets. So you can have eighth house transits that don't necessarily deal with money or inheritance or things like that, but deal more so with a secret that comes out, right? Or something that happens that now needs to be kept secret, and so forth. And again, we keep secrets because we're afraid of what the consequence is. Whether it's a healthy reason or whether it's an unhealthy reason, right? It doesn't matter. The 8th house is going to show that's where the secrets lie. And then finally, 8th house is going to represent death, but more so as a topic. And again, death is something that is taboo in most cases, right? You don't really want to talk about those kinds of things socially. So it's going to represent all those topics that society finds kind of uncomfortable to talk about. And with the 8th house too, we have to remember this is taboo represents other people's kind of system, right? It's what other people dictate as unacceptable, as uncomfortable, as dangerous, as unhealthy. And so it's our response then to how we handle that kind of thing, right? For example, if you grow up in a very religious family, right? Alcohol, for example, might be seen as something that's very taboo. Even though it's not necessarily by most of the rest of society inherently bad, maybe alcoholism, right? Excessiveness is certainly kind of leans into the bad end of the spectrum, but alcohol on its own is, right, potentially kind of just there. Most of society finds it acceptable, doesn't have any issue with it, but certain religious groups, right, religious beliefs may find it to be unacceptable. So that would be a very basic example, but you get the idea, I hope. Right, so it's going to represent the things around us in our own life that other people are saying, hey, it's not okay to be that thing. And that's going to influence how you operate on a very subconscious level, on a very kind of psychological level. So the 8th house then is representing that kind of psychological side of our brain. Because it's kind of the tics, so to speak, that's kind of making us act certain ways to, right, appease or, right, find safety. And again, finding safety is a deep-seated biological function. We need to do it. Physically, emotionally, emotional safety, right, is huge. Mentally, spiritually. And so all those facets are going to each have different interactions with things. So to kind of sum up then, the 8th house is about, number one, what we share with other people. Whether it's resources, whether it's beliefs, whether it's values, whether it's inheritance, debts, loans, etc., etc. It's going to represent intimacy as a byproduct of that kind of exchange, deep exchange with somebody else. And it's going to represent things that are dangerous, right? And how we handle that and the psychological processes it kind of drives within us. And therefore, it's going to represent also what we hide and what we repress and kind of all the different ways in which our brains, our minds, try to outlet to get outside of the dangerous situations and all the little tics and actions and things that we do as a result of that. It's going to represent taboo topics and how we interact with the taboo, right? Which a lot of, just for the record, a lot of astrologers would describe astrology, at least in the West, to the 8th house, which I think certainly it is a little bit, at least in the West. And so therefore, the other thing is occultism. Things like that, things of a more spiritual nature are often going to be seen as taboo as well, and therefore kind of seen as, I don't know if I want to deal with this, right? Which oftentimes we can find the 8th house representing kind of those types of things. Again, more so from the Western perspective. But the 8th house is, what is taboo, what is dangerous by societal standards is very much relative to the society you live in. And so that's something you always have to kind of consider. If we look at the 8th house from a, relative to the other houses, number one, as we said, it's in aversion to the first, right? And that's because it's an area of life that's deeply uncomfortable. And it's something we naturally tend to push down, hide. I don't want to be this thing because society is telling me it's not good to be this thing. And that kind of drives us in our own ways. And that's the relationship it has to the first house. But we still are that sign, right? The only sign that I would say we really aren't is the 7th house. every other sign in our charts, we kind of are that sign. Even the 7th house, we kind of are that sign. So even though it's uncomfortable, it's still a piece of us. It's still a part of us. And so that's why it has those implications of, hey, I got to act a certain way. I got to hide these things, or whatever it is we got to do. By opposition, the 8th house is right opposite the 2nd. We've talked about this, the kind of the dichotomy between the personal resources of the 2nd and the other people's resources of the 8th. By trine, the 8th house is trine to the 12th and the 4th. How does that make sense? Well, number one, from a resource perspective, right? 8th house is going to deal with the resources of others. It's also, therefore, going to deal with inheritance. And the 4th house deals with our family, our lineage, things that are passed on from one generation to the next, which is going to be seen kind of in that moment of exchange in the 8th house. 4th house also represents our private life, or most private self, and therefore how we kind of tend to process things and think about things, kind of our internal world, right, in our own minds. And the 8th house deals with a lot of the psychological qualities that are oriented around our own sense of safety, our own sense of self. And so that naturally flows from one to the other. What we are compulsively doing because we don't feel safe or what have you is going to influence how we think about the world. And how we think about the world is going to naturally shape, right, how we kind of react psychologically. And then the 12th house deals with the subconscious, which obviously flows very naturally into the 8th as well. Those go hand in hand. In terms of the sextile, right, the 8th is going to be sextile to the 6th. I mentioned this earlier. The 6th house deals with handling physical obstacles and servitude, right? And so the natural harmony there, the natural resonance, the sextile be more of an opportunistic harmony, right? An opportunistic flow. Is that, well, if you're working through crisis, that's naturally going to affect the mental side of it, whether for good, right? Allowing you to plow through the crisis, or in terms of the bad, right? Causing things like PTSD or what have you, right? You lose a leg, that's certainly going to alter a lot of the mental, emotional, psychological reaction to things, because now you have to learn a new way to live. On the other hand, to work, right? 6th house is work, you serving people, doing things for other people, therefore working for them. And the 8th house being the other people's resources, that will show kind of how you get the resources from them by that nature as well. The other sextile house is going to be the 11th, right? The 11th house represents our friends, our society, our followers, and our social circles. And if the 8th house represents taboo, that obviously makes sense why they'd be sextile. There's opportunity there because the societies, the social circles we're a part of are going to ultimately kind of color what peer pressure, what taboo things are being put into our life, right? What things our social circles are saying are safe, harmonious, or unacceptable, or what have you. And by changing those social circles, it's naturally going to change, right, the kind of circumstances that around what is deemed safe or unsafe for us personally, at least from the lens of others. Now, by square, the 8th house is going to be square the 5th. And this kind of makes sense, right, in certain ways. On the romantic side, right, what's the natural kind of tension there? Well, if you're going to be romantic with somebody, that obviously is going to want to lead to intimacy. Or if you want to be intimate with somebody, there needs to be some level of romanticism. Whether it's in a true romantic relationship or whether it's kind of fun with the other person, usually you need one before the other. It's hard to go from one without the other. And that's why it's a square dynamic, because there's this kind of tension that's required where one has to kind of act in order to get the other in motion, to allow for the other to happen. The other aspect of that is the 5th house representing children. And children, when you have children, right? I've experienced this myself over the last couple of years. When you have children, it changes you biologically. For the mother, right, you've got all these crazy hormones and crazy things going on where your body is physically, it created a whole human being and then plopped it out. And then on top of it, now your body changes again so that you can support that human being, right, with milk and so forth. And so physically, the mother changes a lot, but that also changes the biology, right? Maybe not biology, but the psychology. Why? Because you have to be in a state of mind in order to take care of this thing that you've now just created. And for the father as well, there's a lot of psychological, hormonal kind of thing that you go through once you've now begun to live with the child. Being close to the child, I think, my understanding, I could be wrong on this, is that it helps kind of formulate a lot of that chemical process going on for the father. And so regardless, one way or the other, you have a lot of change that occurs from having children, right? It changes a lot of your own psychology in order to better, right, be what? A parent. Which parent is naturally somebody who has to be selfless in order to protect the child, to raise the child. And so that's the square dynamic, the 8th house and the 5th. The other square is going to be, sorry, you know what? I misspoke earlier. The other square is going to be the 11th house and the 8th. And that tension between what other people believe, right, and the social circles you put yourself into and how that influences what, right, is kind of set as taboo. That's the square. The sextile is going to be the 10th house, right? And the 10th house is your public image. And that naturally, obviously, is going to give opportunity for the other. If you have a lot of secrets, that's probably going to affect your public life at some point. On the other hand, the things that you're into that are more taboo can also affect your public life, especially if, say, right, you're well regarded as somebody in a particular, say, religious group, and then you have a change of belief, right? That's ultimately going to change your reputation within that group. So there's a lot of influence there, or opportunity for influence, and that's the sextile. The square, again, goes back to the 11th house and other people kind of dictating what is taboo. And then finally, you have the houses that are in aversion, right? The 7th, going to be the one that comes before. 7th is other people. It's close partners, right? It's your relationship with another, the not you. And so the 8th house dealing with intimacy then is a natural kind of extension of that. But intimacy is not something you have with every person that you come into interaction with. And so that's kind of the disresonance, right? The kind of discomfort. It's not something you can just do with everybody. The other one is going to be the other aversion on the other side of the 8th house is going to be the 9th. And the 9th deals with our worldview and our belief systems and our how we grow, how we learn, what we've learned in life, how we expand ourselves. And all of that stuff dealing with our beliefs and what shapes our beliefs is, right, that's naturally discomfortable or uncomfortable with the things that we kind of have as psychological pressures on us. Because what we are doing from a psychological perspective may kind of push us around on some of our beliefs, and what we believe may not jive with what we have, right, experienced growing up. Some of the psychological things we have going on where there may be this kind of disharmony. So it's a very uncomfortable thing because a lot of times our beliefs aren't always shaped based on, right, our psychological process. The other aversions, or the first, like we talked about, is just a deeply uncomfortable place. And then finally, the other one being the 3rd house. The 3rd house representing what? Representing our local space, our day-to-day, right? And obviously that's something that has very little in common with the 8th, other people's resources, right? Psychological things, danger. And hopefully there's not much in common, but sometimes your day-to-day does experience danger. Sometimes you do have events that kind of prick that stuff from the 8th house, those psychological things kind of get shaken up a little bit. But it's not always consistent, and that's why it's kind of that in conjunction aspect. It's something that kind of happens from time to time, and there's not much you can do about it. But you just have to kind of deal with it, right? So that's the 8th house. I hope this made sense. Hope it wasn't too abstract. But yeah, so I am a practicing astrologer. If you were looking for a reading, right, you want to have your own 8th house looked at, you can reach me at my email, james@jdastrology.com. Alternatively, you could just go to my website, jdastrology.com. Anyway, thank you for listening. I hope you have a lovely and wonderful week and enjoy the end of Taurus season as we are soon going to begin Gemini season and move into the summer. So again, thank you for listening and have a wonderful week. Bye.